why are we so passionately focused on the conflict in Gaza in ways in which we are very, very rarely focused on wars, conflicts that outside of our our immediate realm, which we're not actually we don't actually have troops or service people, as it were, on the ground. Why is it that Israel is the enemy of mankind, according to Francesca Albanese, the UN rapporteur for the occupied territories? What is the vehemence? Why are we so vehement about this particular conflict? Why are we so focused on it? And I think there's three reasons. One is we feel this idea of being complicit, in that we supply Israel with armaments and munitions that it's using in the conflict. I think the second is that, armed with our munitions and our technology and so on, and materiel, Israel is overwhelmingly more powerful than the adversaries, than Hamas. And third, I think, is the futility of it. I think if you think about the atomic bombs, for example, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, obviously those were civilian targets. No one had they had no direct military value. More people died in the first few minutes of the atom bomb going off over Hiroshima than have died in Gaza in 3 years. Probably twice as many died in Hiroshima just that day. But the thing about Hiroshima and Nagasaki was that those actions achieved their aim, which was to push Japan into an immediate and absolute surrender, and that saved three, four. I mean, I don't shrug it off, 300,000 or 400,000 people, but 300,000 or 400,000 people saved the lives of millions, and particularly, obviously, American servicemen. It would have been hundreds of thousands of American fatalities if they'd had to invade Japan, beach by beach, fight them in the fields, fight them in the streets, and so on and so forth. So it achieved a military purpose. Whereas in Gaza, however many people it is, the 70-odd thousand people who have died, plus the 20 to 30,000 children, and the war has essentially been a failure. Hamas is still very much in control. So you have to kind of wonder if that kind of the futility of it, which is particularly saddening, and if that is not part of what makes people so angry about it. So one is that we feel complicit because they're using our equipment. We feel that the Israelis are overwhelmingly more powerful and have kind of abused that power in the extent to which they've flattened Gaza and dislodged its people and pushed them into camps and so on and so forth. And thirdly, it hasn't really achieved its aims. But I'd like to just look at another conflict, also in the Middle East, that went on from 2015 to around 2021, and that was the attack of Saudi Arabia on Yemen. And the parallels are very striking. So, what the Saudis attacked Yemen preemptively out of fear that the Houthi, who were an Iranian proxy, very much like Hamas, that the Houthi would would become overly overmighty. The Houthi were throwing missiles into Saudi Arabia. I think they managed to cause a certain amount of damage to an oil refinery. So it wasn't entirely preemptive or entirely unprovoked. The Saudis were supplied to a significant extent, sort of half or more of their military equipment used and munitions and equipment used in Yemen came from Britain, was sold to them by Britain. So we were very much complicit in that war. And it was a horrible war. It was horrible beyond belief. It was just as horrible as Gaza, probably even worse. There was very little restraint on the part of the Saudis. Around 100 to 150,000 people died as a direct result of the conflict. 150,000 Yemenis. Whereas Saudi casualties would have been, practically nothing, because it's all just bombing and it's all just bombing from the air or sending off missiles, and that's obviously a significant proportion of that are the civilian population, and then another maybe 200,000 or more died in the famine, and it was an actual famine, not like in Gaza where there was the risk of famine, but it didn't actually ever eventuate. This gruesome war that we supported, that involved a much stronger, one significantly more powerful adversary than the other, and which, like Gaza, achieved nothing. The Houthi are still there. They're still doing fine, and Saudi Arabia's just had to go off and lick its wounds and bear the cost. But I can't remember any significant protests over what was going on in Yemen. I can't remember was there a Yemeni action who broke into British aerospace and smashed up their production line for the Tornado aircraft or for the Storm Shadow missiles or the Brimstone missiles. I can't remember anything like that. I can't think there was any direct action. There were no huge marches. There was no backlash against Arabs. Most of the time, I can't even think that war in Yemen, as horrible as it was, that it was headlined the news very often, if at all. And the proportion of people, I think 380,000 is the number that most people, that is generally accepted as being the number of people who died in Yemen as a result, either directly or indirectly, of the conflict, and that would have been a similar proportion as to the number of people who died in Gaza. So in Gaza, it's about 1.3% of the population, as it was in 2023, and in Yemen it's about 1.14. So only very slightly less as a proportion of the population as a whole. And yet, one of them obsesses us completely, and the other we just seem not even to care about. So the other distinguishing characteristic, so you get there's the characteristics that they share. The one side is supplied by us, the other side is Iranian meddling in places where they have no business being. Two, the side that we're backing is overwhelmingly more powerful than the side that they're attacking. Three, for a huge human cost, these conflicts have achieved very little, if anything. But there's one other thing that distinguishes the difference between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and that is that Israelis are perceived in the West as being white. So obviously in Western Europe, throughout Western Europe in the 1930s and 40s, Jews were not considered to be white. They were not Aryan, and that's why they had to be segregated and slaughtered, because they were I think Hitler used to think of them as a bacillus, as a sort of an infection that was destroying European Aryan culture in Europe. So somehow, from not being white, Jews have become white, which is also not true. which is not true. Obviously, you have a very large population of Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews who are well, I would say they were Arabs. They might not like to call themselves Arabs, but that's what I would think they are. They speak Arabic. They come from Arab countries. They've lived in Arab countries for millennia. And then there's the Ethiopian Jews, and then there are just general mix of just a general mix of people from different. Jews got everywhere. There were obviously the Persian Jews, Jews from Turkey, and so on, and they all are also have all come into Israel. So I think it's a misconception on the part of most Europeans to say that the Jews are white. To say the Jews are white, they're not by any means exclusively white. But I think that positioning them as white, you can then get into ideas which we'll deal with into some separate videos about being the colonial settler regime, the apartheid regime, and ultimately then the genocidal regime, because we see, and somehow I think that the actual passions that are aroused are to do in a way that they're not aroused at all for the Yemenis and what the Saudi Arabians did to them. But we see the Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, as being a part of us, as part of the white culture that has degraded and exploited and enslaved and the world for many hundreds of years. It's because we actually identify with them that we find them so loathsome and why we hate them so passionately. And I think then that lets other people's particularly South and Central Asian peoples who don't have the history of kind of guilt and complicity in the Second World War and the Holocaust and so on. And so for them, it's a much easier. It's much more binary. It's much more black and white to be able to just see the white Jews on one side and the brown Palestinians on the other side. Whereas with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, of course, it's brown on brown. So even though we're supplying one side and with hugely powerful munitions and materiel, nevertheless we don't identify with them. We don't see the Saudi Arabians as being colonial settlers or part of the white European cultural framework.